The hush money / election interference trial is almost over, and the election is just a little more than 5 months away, which means Donald Trump needs a running mate, and he needs one soon. And it's getting a lot of attention on Capitol Hill. Political reports that a sizable number of Hill Republicans, even some MAGA loyalists, are urging him to, quote, pick a running mate who can attract more wary GOP voters on the center right. Even Nikki Haley, who is already publicly ruled out, or someone perhaps like Senator Tim Scott or Marco Rubio. Joining us now, former New Hampshire Republican Party chair, former RNC executive committee member, and co-founder of the Lincoln Project, Jennifer Horn. My allergies are getting to me today. I'm sorry about that. Let me ask you about running mates. Donald Trump, is there anybody that he can choose that will convince wary, centrist Republicans, maybe like yourself, that they should vote for Donald Trump?
Well, first, let me be clear. There's nobody who could be on that ticket that would cause me to vote for Donald Trump. There's no world where I and a lot of others like me will vote for Donald Trump. And I think the challenge that he's going to face is exactly kind of what you're suggesting there. Who brings over these persuadable Republicans? I think that the idea of Nikki Haley really is off the table. I don't see a world where either one of them would be willing to work with the other. I don't think, frankly, that Donald Trump would particularly benefit from a Nikki Haley as a vice presidential candidate. All those votes that went to Nikki Haley really were primarily anti-Trump votes. A lot of them are going to go to Joe Biden. A lot of them are going to turn into people who just don't vote for president. And then there'll be, a handful of them who will vote for Trump just because he's the GOP guy, and he's going to get those votes anyway. I think it's much more likely that we'll see somebody like a Rubio or a Tim Scott, both of whom have made it very clear that they're willing to do and say whatever is necessary to get the job.
Does a Rubio or a Tim Scott convince, maybe not you, but other Republicans to sign on? He picked Mike Pence because he was evangelical, and he wanted to sew up that vote. Is there a way, with all we know about Donald Trump, to convince that sliver of Republican voters who find him repulsive to come back to him?
Well, I think that both Tim Scott and Marco Rubio offer something in that area. They're both openly religious. They're open about their faith. Neither one of them are afraid to talk about it. We know that minority vote is going to be very important to Donald Trump. We know especially how important the Latino vote has been growing over the last decade, and going forward, the influence they're going to have. So either one of them really brings something to the table. And frankly, they're both candidates who have previously expressed their disdain for Donald Trump in the past and have come full circle for him. And I think that's something, honestly, that Donald Trump finds very attractive.
But Jen, it can't be.
I wouldn't be surprised if either one of them ended up the one.
Be Marco Rubio, because Marco Rubio lives in Florida. I mean, constitutionally, you're not allowed to have two candidates from the same state.
Well, then it sounds like it's more and more. It's more and more looking like Tim Scott, isn't it? I'm not sure who else is out there. Kristi Noem was really high on the list. Nobody who's got a brain at this point would even consider that.
Until she shot her dog.
Exactly. And let's not forget that. But, there are always little holes that you have to fill. But it's really a unique thing when you're talking about Donald Trump. It's never a traditional equation for him. It's never just business as political business as usual. And you've got to have somebody who's really going to be willing to do what Mike Pence did right up until January 6th, which is bow to Donald Trump at every turn.
I also think it's important to question what kind of person, what kind of promises do they make to themselves or to Donald Trump wants to be his running mate after the last vice president, was run out of town to chants of hang Mike Pence, chants that Donald Trump seemed to endorse. Who wants to be that person this time around, and what might they be promising themselves or be willing to do to make it so that those chants don't follow them? One other question. I know you don't want Donald Trump to win. Do you see Joe Biden beating him as of today?
I see there's absolutely a clear and strong path for Joe Biden to beat Donald Trump in the fall. And we're right at that turning point right now too, Katie. It's Memorial Day weekend, going into the summer, approaching the conventions. I have no doubt that the Biden campaign has a plan to start ramping things up, regardless of how the trial goes this week and next week, regardless of some of these weird, crazy Trumpian things.
Jennifer Horn, Jen, thank you so much for joining us.